I am a broken person. This is 17 pages of not very meticulous research and opinions about the Twilight Saga. Originally, I wanted to make a video explaining this meme, which is a visual representation of the connection between 9/11 and Twilight, but I ended up going down this rabbit hole that I am still very, very broken by. And by a rabbit hole, I mean that I read the Book of Mormon. I read it. This is what you get when you, are unemployed. I am not, in fact, going to explain the 9/11 connection because it's pretty self-explanatory. There's a Tumblr post about it. You can look it up. However, what I'm going to explain is actually the historical parallels and inaccuracies in the Twilight Saga. Here's the first question that I asked myself. Did Jacob Black have to be Native American? Now here's the thing. I'm all for Native American representation. I actually ended up researching a bunch of the Pacific Northwest Native American traditions and folklore and legends, and they're all very cool and very interesting. However, Twilight didn't really do that. Everything that I am going to explain can be avoided if Jacob was just Native. And the Twilight Saga didn't dive into Quileute tradition, or they didn't dive into it, but they used it a lot. They used the tribe's name, they used the tribe's base creation legends, and didn't do it justice. Twilight didn't have to make this robust and very interesting culture weird and kind of lame. Stephanie Meyer could have just made the werewolves mismatched. Werewolves, it's a pack of misfits, right? You could have just made that. You end up making that anyways with the Black Pack, but no, it has to be a tribe, and you have to dive into the history and get it all wrong. The thing about werewolves and vampires is that they're very European cryptids. They are linked to Christianity and linked mainly to Europe and Indo-European legends. They are not Native American legends in any way. While there are vampiric cryptids and wolf legends associated with Native Americans and also the Quileute tribe, Stephanie Meyer didn't pay a whole bunch of respect to it. To quote Tyson Houseman, who acted in the Twilight movies, "First of all, I should note that I am fully aware of the Twilight Saga's problematic portrayal of Native Americans and the appropriation of real Quileute myths and traditions into fantasy. I say problematic because these films offer the image of Native Americans basically as mythical creatures, but they are also some of the few Hollywood blockbusters depicting contemporary Native characters as opposed to fake historic relics of a romanticized early American frontier." I have more quotes. This one is from Jesse Wente. I'm bad at names and I'm bad at pronouncing things. A Canadian Aboriginal movie commentator. "In suggesting a treaty between the two, Twilight has the effect of fictionalizing Native people and their history. In doing so, Twilight absolves much of American history of its treatment of Native people." Although Stephanie Meyer claims to have done a lot of research into Quileute legends and folklore, and that, quote, "all of the legends in the books are part of their tradition." Chris Morganroth III, a Quileute master storyteller, said, and I quote, "her book is a work of fiction." I will leave some of the sources that I use in the description below so you can fact check me. Take this video with a grain of salt. I use a lot of wiki stuff. And here's the thing, Twilight doesn't have to be 100% accurate. It's fiction. Whatever. But I can't give Twilight the benefit of the doubt that this wasn't done out of, at the very least, an embarrassing amount of ignorance because of how they treated the native actors who acted in the first movie who refused to then cut their hair. If you remember, in the first movie, the actors for Yuli's pack looks very different from what they look like in the subsequent movies. And this is explained as them changing a lot when they face. The reasoning behind this, as far as I know, in the books, is that the longer your hair as a human is, the longer your fur as a wolf is. And if you have just like super long hair as a wolf, it would not be very practical. The thing is, Twilight casted a whole bunch of native actors, and a lot of them had long hair. There is a strong connection between Native American culture and long hair. Traditionally, they don't cut their hair, which is similar to like Chinese culture. It's similar in a lot of different cultures. The actor that played Samuel actually said that he has never had short hair in his life and was unsure if he would cut his hair. To quote him, "The length of my hair represents the health of my family. When a family member passes away, I cut length from my hair. That being said, I am dedicated to playing this role." What happened was that he didn't end up cutting his hair. He just ended up getting replaced. It's unknown whether or not it was due to the hair or because he wasn't able to gain weight or muscle. It would have been so easy for Twilight to not do any of this if they just made the vampires and werewolves European traditions, because they are. Because newsflash, vampires and werewolves are not a Quileute thing. Okay, so the one thing they got right was that in Quileute legends, in Quileute folklore, they are descended from wolves. However, the way this is said in the movies made it seem like they have wolf genes or they are part wolf and that's why they shapeshift. It's not. By wolves, they do mean two of them. This is their sort of equivalent of Genesis. The story revolves around the Transformer, whose name is... I'm gonna butcher it multiple times in this. Quiety. I got my sources from the site that had an excerpt of Manuel Andrade's 1930 collection Quileute texts, which I will leave in the link down below. Whatever. Happened long ago that Quiety journeyed all over the land, setting the people all right, and instructing the people that would come in the future how they should act. Quiety instructed the people how to build houses. And then there's a bunch of stuff that's not relevant to Twilight, but it is very interesting. Go read it. Then Quiety went on and reached the Quileute land. He saw 2 wolves. There were no people here. Then Quiety transformed the wolves into people. Then he instructed the people, saying, "The common man will have only 1 wife. Only a chief may have 4 or 8 wives. For this reason, you Quileutes shall be brave, because you come from wolves," said Quiety. "In every manner you shall be strong." Which is a fucking sick creation legend, by the way. But the thing about the shapeshifters in Twilight is that they transform the opposite way. They go from being human to shapeshifting into a wolf-like thing. They're not really wolves. They're too big to be wolves. I cannot, for the life of me, find any Quileute or other Northwestern American tradition that has a human transforming into a wolf. Maybe you know of some. Tell me, because I can't find any, and I looked at a whole bunch of legends. Say that this part of Quileute folklore has to do with shapeshifting into a werewolf is like saying that in Christianity humans can transform into clay. Like, it's not the correct direction. Now, I do have to be pedantic and say that the werewolves in Twilight are technically not werewolves, they are shapeshifters, but I will call them werewolves because it's easier, because I will talk about wolves later. The difference between werewolves and shapeshifters is that werewolves don't have control over when they turn, but shapeshifters do. Think Remus Lupin versus Sirius Black. I did, however, if we are only counting this as shape-shifting, found a whole bunch of Native American shapeshifter legends, and you can decide which one is the most similar to Twilight. This is about Twilight. There's the obvious one that pretty much everyone knows about, Wendigos and Skinwalkers. Wendigos are, if you watch Supernatural, you know this. There are humans who have committed the sin of cannibalism and then turn into a monster. And this is a theme that you'll find with a lot of the evil creatures in Native American legends that I researched, is that there is sort of an association with something that you committed, which is quite different from werewolves. Which werewolves, you need another werewolf to turn you, which can be involuntary, and a lot of European cryptids want to turn other humans against their will. And also there's a lack of agency in werewolves, which I will talk about later. There's also skinwalkers, which I'm going to make this quick because I don't want to talk about it much. They're considered magicians, or a sorcerer, I guess, who are so evil that the Navajo tribe, Navajo people, will not fucking talk about them. This is why we don't know much about the myth, because talking about them or thinking about them is supposed to attract them to you. This is why I'm not going to talk about it much, because I would like to sleep tonight. Now, considering that the shapeshifters in Twilight are not antagonistic, they're not the villains of the story, I wanted to find some shapeshifter legends in Native American history that it's not necessarily evil. And I found one called the Nahual. Again, I'm butchering all of this. I don't speak Spanish. Some of these have Spanish pronunciations because they're from like southern United States to South America. I'm fucking trying. So, from my understanding, a Nahual is a sorcerer or a brujo, depending on their tonal animal, which, from what I understand, is sort of like a spirit animal, or it's sort of similar to the Chinese zodiac because it's based on. I could not find any good primary sources for this because Nahual is also a clothing brand, so the SEO is horrible. But from what I understand, the tonal animal of a baby depends on either when the baby was born or the behavior of animals before the baby was born. From my understanding, it's not like turning into this shapeshifter makes you inherently good or evil. It's based on your intention and your personality. So they could have just used this. The only problem is if you wanted it to be a pack that's based on a familial structure or a tribe structure, the reason why you can't do this is because the tonal animals does not necessarily have to be a wolf or dog. It can be a jaguar, it can be a puma, it can be a species of birds. It would be difficult to get a tribe whose tonal animal is all wolves. That you're just very good at family planning at that point. But if you wanted to have a mismatched pack of just random shapeshifters, it would make a lot more sense. And also you would make it, I think, a lot less really offensive to this like small group of people. However, the issue with this is that it's from the wrong part of the continent. It's definitely not from Forks or La Push or anywhere near Washington. There's also the Wahila, which is, from what I understand, is just an evil spirit that looks like a bigger version of a wolf, and it looks like a dire wolf, which is very similar to what the werewolves in Twilight look like, because they are gigantic. That's not what, like, wolves are big. Wolves are bigger than you think they are, but they're not like 9 feet tall. You're not gonna ride a wolf the way Renesmee rode Jacob. That sentence didn't sound good coming out of my mouth. They also are said to rip people's heads off, which is how a lot of the wolves in Twilight kill a lot of the vampires. So there's that similarity, but the only issue is that the Wahila is not a shapeshifter. It's just an evil spirit that looks like a wolf. However, this is the best comparison I could find to the wolf form, but my research skills are not very good. But it's definitely better than Bella's. And here we get to the vampire part, because vampires are also very much not a Quileute thing. Even several Quileute tribe websites and museums in and around La Push have made pages on their sites specifically to say the cold ones are not a thing. Bella's research was correct in one way, that vampiric legends are pretty much everywhere. But the vampires that the Cullens are, sort of the very pale, human-looking, and very suave, is A, very European, and B, quite recent. However, this idea of vampires being romantic can only be traced back into the 19th century with the book The Vampire, which is a full century after the vampire epidemic, where people were accused of being vampires. There were things that you would do to a body to make sure they don't become a vampire, and people are killed because people think they're vampires, all that jazz. Good old 1700 shit. You might be familiar of putting like a gold coin or something in the mouth of a corpse to be able to hear if they're chewing, because that would mean that they're a vampire. This goes back to that time, which, first of all, ew. Second of all, fucking chew quieter. Native American culture also have a lot of vampiric legends. The most popular one would be the chupacabra. I think everyone knows what the chupacabra is. It translates to goat sucker, and it sucks goats. But they are terrifying. They look like this, apparently. And they will go to places that have a lot of livestock and then suck the blood out of your goats, which is not ideal if you own goats. However, chupacabras are actually quite a recent development in terms of folklores. It only goes back, weirdly enough, to the 1970s. I didn't know this. I thought they were like an old legend, but apparently it was supposed to be based, the look of the chupacabra was based on a sci-fi movie called Species, because the description of the chupacabra looks like Syl from Species. Sure. If we compare this to the Cullens, there's clearly a difference, right? If I saw one of these in front of my house sucking on a goat carcass, I would say goodbye to the world immediately. Thank God it's nowhere near Eid al-Adha, so there's no goats around me. But if there were goats around me, I would not sleep tonight. Not only is the chupacabra a very recent development, the term vampire was actually attributed to it. It was referred to Spanish, El Vampiro de Mocha. So it is not a vampire legend as much as it's a legend inspired by vampires. So we'll just cross that off as a possibility of what the Cullens are, first of all, because they don't look like a demented fish being. Moving on. There's one from the Caribbean, however you want to pronounce it, called the Sukuya. However, it's supposed to look like old hags. So I don't think that's what the Cullens are. There's one from Colombia called La Tunda, but from the article La, you could also probably tell that this one is a feminine cryptid. So I'm not, let's find another possibility. There's one called the Cihuatateo, and it is supposed to be a woman who died in childbirth. Now, it's really sad, this idea, but there's a part of this that makes sense in terms of Twilight. Part of a legend says that it will seduce men, and then have sex with them, and then drive them crazy. Which, in terms of Twilight, it might not be a woman who's doing this, but someone definitely seduced someone and drove them crazy. None of the vampiric legends I could find was in any way similar to the Cullens or any of the European legends of vampires. However, you might be asking me at this point, what about the cold ones? What about Apotamkin? Here's the thing. Let's have a talk. I looked into the Apotamkin thinking maybe like it's one of those cryptids that's like it has fangs, it sucks blood, it goes around at night, and then I could live with myself. The Apotamkin is a fucking sea monster. A lot of research my ass. It's a sea monster. The columns are definitely not swimming. The only similarities between vampires and the Apotamkin is that the Apotamkin also has fangs. And that's it. There's one more similarity. The Apotamkin tend to prey on careless children. Now, I thought that maybe Stephanie Meyer just googled like Native American vampires and then found Apotamkin and then just ran with it. But there's this fact that made me go absolutely insane while researching. So the Apotamkin is supposed to be in Passamaquoddy Bay, which first of all is in Maine. So again, opposite sides of the country, right? However, then I find out that this bay, one of its borders, is in Washington County, Maine. So I think what happened was Stephanie Meyer found Forks, then found La Push, and then found Quileute Legends, and then just like Googled Washington vampires or Washington Native American vampire legends, and found this one from Washington County, Maine, and ran with it. The point of all of this is that the way vampires and werewolves are depicted in Twilight is an entirely European notion. It does not show up anywhere that I've looked in Native American legends or pretty much anywhere else. It's pretty much only European legends. Funnily enough, in a lot of Native American legends, the idea of werewolves or shapeshifting into wolves or an animal and drinking blood or preying on humans are one and the same, including the werewolf legend in New Orleans, loup-garou, which is based on the French idea of werewolves. Even this creature that is literally named werewolf in French is sometimes linked with vampirism, and even the Wikipedia article of vampires links back to both the Sucriant and loup-garou. It is more common than not, I find, in a lot of non-European cultures for the two ideas to be one and the same, including in Hebrew folklore. There's a cryptid called the Aluka, which is a horse leech, which is a terrifying concept, because if it's a leech that sucks on horse blood, I'm fine. But what if it's a leech the size of a horse? It's not, but still. This is the idea of vampires that is actually present in the Bible. And surprisingly enough, it also can transform into a wolf. I will touch on this later. Again, I'm making a lot of promises that I have to deliver on. However, at this point I was asking myself, why would Stephanie Meyer just like made up Native American legends? Or like use real names and then made up the legends? Why wouldn't she just have the European ideas of vampires? Because you could have made it just European vampires came to America and then infected everyone, turned a lot of people. Because this is modern day America. It's not like there's no white people there. And then I ended up going down the most absurd rabbit hole I could have possibly gone down. So now there's part 2. The rivalry between vampires and werewolves have been going on for a long time in European literature. The two monsters have a lot of similarities, but also enough of a difference to make them good foils for each other. They both exist in ambiguity, And in a lot of European literature, including like Shakespeare and stuff, ambiguity or existing in ambiguity is usually seen as evil or associated as evil. In vampires, the ambiguity is between life and death, because vampires exist in a wholly different state or an in-between state of undeath. In Twilight, this concept of being undead is quite obvious by their lack of blood. Their bodies are it's like brittle, but also in the fact that vampires can't get pregnant. They can get someone else pregnant, which is confusing, but apparently you can't get pregnant. And it doesn't seem like it's due to a lack of trying, considering Emmet. Werewolves, on the other hand, exist in the ambiguous state between humans and animals. And the thing is, this doesn't seem very important if you tend to look at things the scientific way, because humans are animals, right? We are a species of animals. However, in Christianity, which both werewolf legends and Twilight has a lot of roots in, there is a very big difference between humans and animals. Mainly, humans are supposed to have agency. Humans are supposed to have free will, and humans are also supposed to have soul. Because in Genesis, I'm bringing up Genesis again, humans are created on a different day from animals and created to preside over the animals, and also created in the image of God. So if you are an in-between, you are no longer in the image of God, so you are no longer, salvageable. Salvageable is not the right word. You can't be saved, And in Christianity, there is quite a big emphasis on not being between the binary. And this is apparent even in the way I was taught about Jesus, because Jesus is supposed to be God and human, but it's not like he's 50-50. He is 100% God and 100% human. There's no in-between. In the lore of vampires and werewolves, their existence in the in-between is the thing that makes them sin, it's the thing that tortures them, and it's the sin that excludes them from salvation. It's the thing that makes them soulless. And if you're asking why I'm bringing up Christianity, it's because of the Mormonism thing. For this, I am heavily relying on a paper by Georgina Ledvinka, which I will link down below. Again, it's like a TLDR version of this video. Just read that. It's much better. What are you doing here? In Mormonism, and I will refer to this as Mormonism and Mormons because the LDS Church is not the only Mormon church. I am referring to Mormonism. Right? And in the story of Mormonism and the story of the Book of Mormon, white Americans or white Mormons and Native Americans are inextricably linked. They're supposed to both be descendants of a guy named Lehi, who had a few kids, but the main ones that are relevant to the story is Nephi and Laman. I am butchering all of this, and I'm refusing to look up any of the IPA right now because I am stubborn and a masochist, apparently. Mormons believe that the descendants of Nephi, called Nephites, are now white Mormons, and the descendants of Laman, now called Lamanites, are what we would call Native Americans now. Now I'm gonna ask you to follow me here first, because I'm gonna explain it, but I'm gonna work backwards. Nephites are represented in Twilight by the Cullens, and the Quileute tribe is a stand-in for Lamanites. I'll explain, don't worry. There's a lot of parallels between the story of Twilight when we frame it this way with the story of the Book of Mormon, including the fact that there is a generational rift between the Nephites and Lamanites, or the equivalent in the Twilight books, the vampires and the werewolves. In Jacob chapter 1 verse 14, yes, I'm quoting the Book of Mormon. But I, Jacob, shall not hereafter distinguish them by these names, but I shall call them Lamanites that seek to destroy the people of Nephi, and those who are friendly to Nephi I shall call Nephites, or the people of Nephi, according to the reigns of the kings. The werewolves and the vampires also have a peace treaty, which only goes back like a generation, which is also foretold in the Book of Mormon. For Nephi chapter 1 verse 17, there were no robbers nor murderers, neither were there Lamanites, nor any manner of ites, but they were in one, the children of Christ, and heirs to the kingdom of God. Now you might tell me, Darlene, they just talk about a rivalry. It can be anyone, doesn't have to be white people and Native Americans. Well, unfortunately, I'm only on like page 4. The idea that the Lamanites are Native Americans is actually part of the LDS Church's teaching. And how do I know this? I went to their website. Are excerpts from the website, from the LDS Church's website. While some early Latter-day Saints speculated about which specific groups were the descendants of the Book of Mormon peoples, most considered the Native Americans broadly as heirs to Book of Mormon promises. And missionaries taught people of indigenous ancestry in the Americas and in the Pacific that they were the descendants of the Nephites and Lamanites. So, there's also this quote, which I'm not going to explain because I don't want to touch this. It's very dicey and I'll get controversial. This is already controversial. I'll get controversial later. However, I'm just going to read you this quote and then you can consider the optics of the werewolves being Native Americans and the vampires being white. This is from 2 Nephi chapter 5, and this is a direct quote while they're talking about the Lamanites. And he had caused the cursing to come upon them, yea, even a sore cursing, because of their iniquity. For behold, they had hardened their hearts against him, that they had become like unto a flint. Wherefore, as they were white and exceedingly fair and delightsome, that they might not be enticing unto my people, the Lord God did cause a skin of blackness to come upon them. Is this better? Should be better. Furthermore, there's a big link between the persecution of Mormons in the history of the United States and vampires, weirdly enough, as you can see from this picture. And there's a big reason for this. The main reason is that vampires are seen to be sexually transgressive. Vampires are seen to be polygamists. Dracula had 3 wives in Bram Stoker's book. But also, vampires are sexual in like a Freudian way. And this is because... Sure, I'll say it. Because vampires penetrate their victims and then suck out their life essence. However, in Twilight, the Cullens defy this idea. However, in Twilight, the Cullens defy this idea not only by not sucking the blood out of humans, which now that I think about it, is it better if they did it to humans? However, they are also monogamous. And even Edward, who wanted to be abstinent before marriage with Bella, even though that did result in monster fucking, which I don't think is like chaste, but Georgina Ledvinka, in her paper argues that this is a way for Stephanie Meyer to rewrite the idea of Mormons being sexually transgressive or being polygamists and writing them as sort of the perfect, picturesque white picket fence American family. However, this is not where the parallels stop. So let's now talk about free will. In a whole bunch of religions, including Christianity, the idea of denying oneself worldly pleasures is a big thing. A big thing about getting closer to God, a big thing about piety, a big thing about self-control. And even though this is in no way unique to Mormonism, there is a big emphasis on the idea of agency, on this sort of denial of one's pleasures, and a lot of ex-Mormons have talked about how the rules don't necessarily make a lot of sense because some allow you to drink soda, some don't, some it depends on what soda, it depends on like this has caffeine but you can still drink it, this doesn't have caffeine but you can't drink it. And when we look at Twilight, the Cullens purposefully deny themselves their most natural instinct as vampires, which is to drink human blood. They drink animal blood, which they call vegetarianism, right? And you can see in Twilight that this is a struggle. This is not natural to them. You can see that Jasper is very much struggling. Alice still struggles. Edward like almost shit his pants, I think, when Bella walked into the classroom. Within the Cullens, you can see that Carlisle and Esme are the most able to control this desire, right? They don't react when Edward brings Bella home. Carlisle can control his thirst so much that he works in a hospital. But this also points to another idea in Mormonism where family is a very important thing. It's one of the core blessings. And the familial structure in the Cullens goes like this. Carlisle gets the money. Carlisle changes a lot of the members of the family, and then Esme takes care of them as a stay-at-home mom. And then everyone else in the family looks to Carlisle for guidance, right? And Esme takes care of them. Now, doesn't that look familiar? And we can chalk all of this up to coincidence and maybe say that this is just the familial structure that Stephenie Meyer grew up with. Except for the fact that this is only a Cullen thing. Because Bella is an only child of a divorced family. Even from the very beginning of the movie, you are told that her parents are divorced and her mom is traveling with her new boyfriend. And she has to travel back and forth between both parents. And then you have the Quileute tribe, and you have Billy Black and Sue Clearwater, both of whom either have lost their spouses or lose their spouse in the storytelling of the movie. Not only that, there are rifts between, for example, Leah Clearwater and Emily Young, who are family, but they are now sort of not as friendly, not as close as they were as children. And when you see a tight-knit family as a blessing from God, in reward to you doing what is expected of you, it does seem a little bit sus that the group of people who are stand-ins from who your scripture refers to as inherently less morally righteous to then not get the blessing. And the people who are definitely not descendants of the Book of Mormon's promises just straight up don't have it. There's also a massive emphasis on Bella wanting to be part of a big family, wanting to be part of the Cullens, and her wanting to be with Edward was also coupled with her wanting to be a Cullen and also her wanting to be a vampire. And Leah Clearwater also wanted to join Jacob's pack so she could have somewhere to belong. Both of these are examples of the women in the movie who don't have that kind of familial structure wanting to join a different group with a strong male leader. Speaking of Leah Clearwater, we now have to talk about agency in the werewolves. I'm not imprinting, not yet. I'm not ready. I'll talk about it later. Be patient. But Leah Clearwater is the only known female shapeshifter in the history of the tribe, which is very interesting because no one expected her to change, despite her having a direct line to her mom's side of the family, who is a descendant of the Yulee pack. And her phasing was so surprising that not only did it jumpstart Seth's phasing, it also, as far as the book series' canon is concerned, killed her dad. When she does phase, she can't control her anger. And this is the same in Jacob as well. Jacob couldn't control his anger and jealousy while in the movie theater with Bella and Mike. Not only these two, also Sam Yulee got so angry that he injured the woman that he imprinted on. So the person who he is supposed to protect. And he injured her so bad that their cover story was that she got mauled by a bear. Not only that, being in a pack also doesn't seem like fully a choice because Leah is said to have wanted or have tried to leave Sam Yulee's pack multiple times but was unable to. They also have no agency over where, when, or whose minds they read or project their thoughts to. And from what Jacob said, the second he made the decision to leave Yulee's pack, he couldn't hear any of their thoughts anymore, and they couldn't hear his thoughts anymore. So they don't have control over their powers. While the vampires, like Bella, can not only control their powers, they can also hone their powers and essentially become Avatar: The Last Airbender Part 2. Again, this goes back to the idea of agency and its association with piety and with righteousness, right? However, this is also just really sad for Leah, and I want to talk about this because it's a story that should have been explored more in the movies, but wasn't. But if you don't know, Leah Clearwater is Sam Yuli's ex-girlfriend. Why did they break up, you might ask?
Like when you see her, everything changes.
Fine, I'll talk about imprinting. So what happened was that Sam Yuli imprinted on his ex-girlfriend's cousin. And somehow, this is the least creepy imprinting that we see in Twilight. If you don't know, click away. If you don't know, don't find out. If you don't know, imprinting is the way that wolves sort of determine their soulmate. They're supposed to make eye contact and then gravity moves. It feels like gravity moves. And you are forever bound to this person. The wolves don't choose who they imprint on, which results in Sam Yuli imprinting on his ex-girlfriend's cousin. Number 2, the female that they imprint on don't then imprint back on them, which resulted in Emily Young rejecting Sam Yuli over and over and over and over again, to the point where she ordered Sam Yuli to go back to Leah. Because again, Emily Young and Leah Clearwater were very close as children. Like, Emily Young not only wanted to reject Sam, did reject Sam so many times, to the point where she said, "You're just like your dad." And then what did he do? Injure her so bad that they said it was a bear. And then what did she do after? She said yes to him. So, it's already iffy about consent and all that. But also, it is said that Emily just finally realized how much Sam loved her. And definitely not because he wore her down. And she's probably fucking scared of him, considering he scarred her face. And she probably thinks that no one else would want her because she has a disfigured face, because Sam Yuli attacked her. I fucking love Twilight. I love Twilight. I love Twilight. And the third problem with imprinting is they don't decide when they imprint. And you might be saying, that's not that big of a deal. You can fall in love anytime. There's no age limit to imprinting. And if you're wondering why I said female and not like woman, is because 2 out of the 5 instances of imprinting in Twilight are on children. Side note, considering that the vampires, the cold ones, Apotamkin, are a sea monster, I'm wondering if the fact that Renesmee was nicknamed Nessie was a hat tip to that. I don't think it is, because none of this series is like well researched, but maybe. I can dream. If the person they imprint on is young, they won't be attracted to them romantically or sexually. It will be like a brother, like a protector. However, they will turn romantic when the imprinted on ages up. Now, the difference between this and, Hollywood creepy people is that this is not intentional. They don't choose who they imprint on. I hope. There's 2 possibilities. Number 1, they don't choose who they imprint on. Thus, we can't really blame them. But then we can now question why the Native Americans who are supposed to be stand-in for the Lamanites are pedophile coded, And you are also making the wolves have a lack of agency, which again, if you look at Mormon doctrine, would make them inherently less morally righteous. And if you look at 1 Nephi 12:23, Nephi said, "The Lamanites became a dark and loathsome and a filthy people, full of idleness and all manner of abominations." Another possibility is that the wolves do have a choice, and then they're just creepy, and it's not addressed in any of the Twilight materials, and Stephanie Meyer just didn't think about it. I don't know which one's worse. Mind you, there's no root of imprinting in both Quileute marriage practices and also in wolves. So I don't know where this came from. Wolves are not monogamous. Wolves can change mates from breeding season to breeding season, or just fuck different wolves in the same breeding season. They're animals, they don't care. The term imprinting, as far as I can find, most similarly refer to the idea of how newborns learn, which, according to Encyclopedia Britannica, imprinting in psychobiology is a form of learning in which a very young animal fixes its attention on the first object with which it has a visual, auditory, or tactile experience, and thereafter follows the object. There is something in mammals called pair bonding, and it does happen in wolves. But pair bonding also happens like between mother and child. It happens a lot during breastfeeding, so it's not like a romantic thing or a sexual thing. So again, why? Now going back to the idea of agency, right? The idea of agency and piety has been associated long enough that it has been used, of course, by race scientists to marginalize people of color, especially African women. And from this article that was talking about the book Fearing the Black Body, it says that the idea that there is a correlation between skinniness or thinness with the idea of being able to control your cravings is quite new. And when they have that standard, they imposed it on people who have no fucking clue about that standard, which is Southern African women, and concluded that because they weren't lean and lithe, they weren't as pious or morally righteous as Europeans, because they weren't controlling what they eat. This idea of agency has been used to associate people with color with savagery, with moral inferiority, with dim-wittedness, which is a Shakespeare thing. Apparently this is that old. It's not a good look that the werewolves in Twilight can't control a bunch of stuff that they do, while the vampires at least try really hard to control everything and succeed a lot of the times. Not only this, but imprinting in Twilight also brings forward the idea of sexism, because Leah is the only female shapeshifter, and she does not know if she can reproduce or imprint. And also, because she is a shapeshifter, she has the duties of a werewolf. Here's the problem with that. Leah is the only woman in a completely patriarchal domain. It's a completely male domain, except for her. And she was described as the smallest, and even the thing that she has over all of them, which is speed, she describes it as, instead of like a thing to be proud of, she describes it as the only thing she has a claim on. Like, everything is bad except for this one thing that's like kind of good. Her identity relies completely on following a man. First it's Samuel Lee, then it's Jacob Black, because of the pack structure, right? Because if you are not a natural or elected alpha, you need to be in a pack. In becoming a shapeshifter, she also loses her femininity, she loses her menstruation cycle, and she becomes very, very angry, which goes against the traditional idea of womanhood. She can't carry out a traditional duty of a woman in the tribe either, and she can't have kids. Probably, if you have no periods, you probably have a very decreased chance of having children. And she also like cut her hair, because again, very long fur on a wolf, not very practical. And this is a point of contention for her. She talks about how she feels like she doesn't belong, like no one wants her, like she's used to being rejected, she's used to being second choice, and she also wonders if she was just not feminine enough. Now, putting the only woman in a completely male structure and then making her just the most horrifically miserable person is already an odd choice, but also then in the books, making that change the thing that gave her dad a heart attack. What? Why? You also add the fact that she's the smallest, which means that she has a net disadvantage in hunting. And when looking through the Mormon lens of blessing, which includes largely a tight-knit family, Leah is completely alone. She caused a heart attack in her dad. She was rejected by the man she loved, and she probably can't make a family of her own. she doesn't get any of these blessings. And considering she does not follow traditional femininity, it is pretty suspicious that she gets literally none of these benefits. Because you can argue that Rosalie is also infertile. Rosalie also doesn't have a biological family. Rosalie also carries a lot of misery and guilt. However, Rosalie has Emmett, Rosalie has the Cullens, and Rosalie has people she can depend on. Leah doesn't. It really seems like this implies that if you don't follow the traditional rules of femininity, you'll end up sad and alone and regretful. But if you do follow traditional femininity, even if you do have infertility problems or anything like that, you can still have one of the other blessings in Mormonism, an eternal marriage. Even though Rosalie can't have kids, she can still be with Emmett for the rest of her life, which is forever. But this also fits with the idea of if Bella was to end up with Jacob, their marriage, barring like any premature death happening, their marriage will end in a few decades. But with Edward, it is an eternal marriage unless one of them commit exit game or someone kills them, right? Bella was also rewarded on becoming a vampire when she fulfilled the traditional feminine ideal of sacrificing herself for a potential child, even when that means death, right? She broke her back, became paralyzed, and then only after was she turned into a vampire. Now here's the thing. In terms of the plot, 100% her choice. 100% understand why they had to wait until she gave birth to then turn her. 100% get that, right? What I don't get is the choice to write it. With this, she's also rewarded with a new family. Now here's the thing. In Mormonism, virtue is related to the idea of pale skin or white skin, and sin is related to black skin or dark skin. And after Bella opted to sacrifice herself and only then got turned into a vampire, she became more pale. She became a vampire, obviously. Which, in terms of the Twilight books, she became more like the Cullens, who are described as chalky pale, an asset to the community, and well-behaved and polite. Or in the words of the Book of Mormon, white, exceedingly fair, and delightsome. Now that we've talked about religion, feminism, and abortion, let's talk about something definitely a lot less controversial. Why is Jasper a fucking Confederate soldier? One of the biggest what the fuck moments when I was watching the Twilight movies was the fact that they just dropped this bomb that Jasper was not only a Confederate soldier, but also lied about his age so he can join the Confederacy, and also was a high-ranking official. He was the youngest major in Texas. Like, he wasn't just drafted and was conflicted about this whole thing. He chose to be there and then, didn't regret it. Here's the thing. Vampires being racist is weirdly enough not a unique thing to Twilight. Anne Rice, told you I'm gonna talk about Anne Rice. Anne Rice's interview with a vampire had Louis DuPont Duloc, a plantation owner. Damon Salvatore and Bill Compton were also Confederate soldiers. Why? Can we please stop writing vampires as Confederate soldiers? You can just make them older, or if you draft them, then you talk about regrets. You can make them a Union soldier. Because I was crazy Googling this because I've had a week-long migraine. Crazy Googling this, why are they Confederate soldiers? And people were like, well, it's just the time. There's two sides of the war. You could have just made them from the other side. It's also, there's less sun in a place like New York in comparison to Texas. So if vampires are vulnerable to the sun, just make them be in a cold, dark place. And then you can make them not a Confederate soldier. To paraphrase a joke told by the movie buds, it is quite interesting that these vampires who are Confederate soldiers decide to then surround themselves by the palest people possible. Now, this is doubly interesting when you think about Brigham Young, yes, of Brigham Young University fame, and how he was the guy who not only introduced African slavery in Utah, but also ratified slavery in Utah and provided them with a market to do so in. Now, to be fair, this is more of a Brigham Young thing than a Mormon thing, because a lot of Mormons actually got in conflict either with each other or with non-Mormons due to their pro-abolition stance, including Joseph Smith, who ran for president with the platform of slave buying program, so you would buy them into freedom. He was killed during his presidential campaign, but he was kind of flip-flopping throughout his life, but at the end of it, he was pro-abolition. The explicitly pro-slavery stance didn't start until after Brigham Young, because even after Smith's death, the stance on slavery was like to each their own, which is very weird, but they put it as it should be between the slave owners and God, which is some like hate the sin, love the sinner bullshit. However, Brigham Young then taught explicitly that slavery was okay and sanctioned by God, which goes with Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5 to 8, which states, "Slaves, be obedient to your human masters with fear and trembling and sincerity of heart as to Christ." Is it in the version of the Book of Mormon that I read? No, it's in the fucking Bible. It's in just the Christian Bible that you probably have seen in hotel rooms. I've decided that I regret doing this research. Now, even though this pro-slavery stance didn't last until modern day, the idea of Black people not being able to be an ordained priest in the LDS Church, which priesthood in Mormonism is different from priesthood in like Christianity or like Catholicism, where in Catholicism it's a sacrament that you have to study for and then take. It's a whole rite. Priesthood is more similar to the Catholic idea of confirmation. And if you're a fan of the musical Book of Mormon, you'll know this, that until 1978, Black people were not able to join the priesthood. Look, I don't have a problem with most of the vampires being white. It's easier for the makeup artists probably to make white people look pale, because if you take someone with darker skin and you put white makeup on them, it doesn't look like they are lacking blood, they just look like they have white makeup on. Vampires are a European legend. I'm just saying, making your vampires Confederate soldiers and then painting that in a good light is fucked, especially because with Jasper, his power is empathy. And if you don't know, powers in vampires in Twilight is based on their talents or personality as a human. So Jasper was very charming, and as a vampire, he could feel other people's emotions and then also influence them. And this is one of the only powers that Bella can't defend against. His heightened empathy is the reason why he became a vegetarian in the first place, because every time he would kill a newborn while he was in the Southern Vampire Wars, which is a fucking thing, by the way, every time he would kill a newborn, he would feel what they were feeling, and he felt so guilty that it became one of the things that they talk about. And he talked about how he regrets killing the newborns. At no point did he go, "Oh yeah, I also regret being in the Confederacy." It also doesn't help that the only Black vampire in Twilight, Laurent, is not Black in the books, because I was like, surely at some point, if there are Black vampires, they would be like, hold on, apparently not, because they're not in the books. And the only vampires who are not white in the books are the vampires who are native Brazilians. And then to again point out the movie buds and what they said, they were like, it is kind of odd that the only times there were indigenous people outside of the like werewolf and their tribe, the only times were like, it's, you know, exotic people with exotic powers, because the only time was because they were gathering up people to fight the Volturi, and all of these people have weird powers. And also the only hybrid child that they could find. Again, this whole thing just screams of like, I grew up in a very sheltered environment and didn't know that I probably should research this more. So I'm not in any way calling Stephanie Meyer racist. I don't think she is. I think she's just like writing shit. I think she's just kind of not super diligent in terms of research and like thinking a whole bunch about the implications of little things. But I am saying this guy is racist. I'm fine with that. And before I get even more angry about this, let's talk about something actually not as controversial. I hope. It's time to talk about these good boys. Finally, I read a bunch of David Elmec's papers for this because he is the wolf man. I am going to largely talk about wolf pack structures, and there are a whole bunch of inaccuracies when it comes to the wolf pack structures in Twilight in comparison to how wolves in the wild actually structure themselves. And you might think, yeah, like the alpha and then the beta and then the omega, and I would have to say to you, stop going to AO3, actually please pick up a book. It's maybe good for your mental health if you just stop reading ABO fiction for a while. However, this is also like a very popular idea that wolves A, mate for life, and B, have a pecking order with an alpha, beta, and omega. They don't. So alpha wolves are not a thing. When we think of alpha, we tend to think about like alpha males, especially recently because of men with mics. These are like the incel Chad meme where the men who are the most masculine and the strongest and the most aggressive get to reproduce, while men who are as aggressive, as attractive, as strong, as big don't get to mate. And this stems from actually David Elmec's book, The Wolf: Ecology and Behavior of an Endangered Species, which popularized the idea of alpha wolves, which was based on Rudolf Schenkel's 1948 paper, Expression Studies in Wolves. If you want to read the paper, David Elmec's website has the whole paper, or the whole English version of the paper, in the most inconvenient form of download possible, which is just like 10-page a piece of like a 50-page book, so you have to download 5 PDFs. But it's there, you can read it. And the thing about Schenkel's paper is that it does talk about wolf pack structures and that there's an alpha male and an alpha female. However, Schenkel's paper actually talks about wolves in captivity in a zoo. And it actually also talks about the relationship between the wolf pack and zookeepers and how protective and territorial they are. The wolves, not the zookeepers. Weirdly enough, he also just like talks about dogs a lot. Like house pets. He would go like, well, wolves are in pecking order structure. Which in dogs, like he would compare the behavior of wolves to domestic dogs and then be like, I've proven it. Sorry? This wasn't disproven until David Elmec did a 13 summer long observation of wolves and published the paper in 1999. This was like a 50-year long misunderstanding of wolves, which when it comes to wolves is not unique. We've learned more about wolves in the past 40 years than in history ever, mostly because wolves for a long time were hunted and endangered, so observing wolves in the wild was not super possible. But what David Elmec found was that wolves in the wild structure themselves as families. So it would be a breeding male, a breeding female, which are just other words for mom and dad and then their kids. And packs would grow and shrink when either the breeding pair breeds or when their pups are big enough to leave and then start packs on their own. And there's this idea that alpha males are the only male in the pack that breeds. And this is somewhat true because the breeding male is almost always the only male that breeds. but that's because the rest are his kids. And although animals don't generally like care much about incest, in terms of wolves, the reason why the breeding pair are the only ones that breed is that wolves tend to leave the nest before they reach the age of sexual maturity. The youngest they ever recorded was like 22 months, up to 4 years old. And usually wolves leave before the age of 2, and most will leave before the age of 3. So the reason why the alphas would be the only ones breeding in a pack of wolves is because they're the only ones that can fuck. The reason why this is so different in captive wolves is because captive wolves, they don't leave their packs because you're just in a zoo enclosure or in a wolf center or whatever, and they're also mismatched wolves. They're not wolves that know each other from birth. So there will be some animosity, because imagine if you just get locked in a house with like 10 people that you don't know, you probably won't get along with them as much as you would get along with like people you know from when you were young. And the Quileute shapeshifters in Twilight mirrors the structure of a wild wolf pack a lot more than a captive wolf pack, because they are, even though there are multiple packs and there are mismatched wolves in those packs, the lineage goes to one person, which is Ta'aki. And Ta'aki had 3 descendants, which is relevant to the Twilight story, which is the Yuli pack, the Black pack, like the original Ephraim Black pack, and the Atearas. And it's not like those families then separated throughout their history, because Jacob Black has werewolf DNA from both his paternal and maternal side. So his paternal side was directly descended from the Black pack, and his maternal side was directly descended from the Ateara pack. So even though in like the Yuli pack, right, there's Sam Yuli, there's Jacob Black, they are from different families. However, they are descended from one shapeshifter, and they're descended from 3 different people not that long ago. Since these packs are organized as families, it is very odd that they would be in an alpha, beta, omega sort of structure, because that's not a thing that happens with family packs. Not only that, the alpha structure in Twilight is genetically coded or elected, which is also not how wolf packs work. We think of alpha wolves as fighting for dominance, which is not a thing. In wolves, fights between wolves in the same pack are very rare, especially in the wild. Again, David Elmec observed wolves in the same place for 13 summers and saw none. The only time that he wrote about wolf conflict was between 2 wolves of the same pack. At this point, he was still using the term alpha, so the alpha male and the alpha female against an alien wolf, whose identity was unknown, but it was unlikely that it was related to the pack in any way. Not only that, but even in captivity, even when we're talking about packs with alpha structures, it's not an inherent thing. It's also not like you fight and then you become the alpha forever. It's something you can gain and lose. And when we talk about alpha, we tend to think about this like idea of power and a pecking order. But with wolves, there's a much simpler explanation. They're just going to be more dominant because they're the parents. They have to be dominant so their kids don't get into danger, because the kids are young. They are not sexually mature. They can't go out on their own. They need a structure of some kind, and that's the easiest structure. And also when we think about alpha males in terms of like the alpha male podcast epidemic, we think of them as being so goddamn sexist and wanting obedience, right? And here's the thing about that in wolves. While most of the time the breeding female shows subordination behavior towards the males, in no way is she just obedient to the male breeder, right? Because that's not how wolves work. It wouldn't be effective. What they do is they have a division of labor. The male wolves go foraging and hunting, and the female wolves takes care of the pack and does defense. And the female wolves are generally better at defense, that's why they do it. Also, in Mech's observation, he found that the only practical, not the only, but the most practical use of this pecking order, which isn't a pecking order, but the most effective use for it is only in who gets to ration the food out. So it's not like who gets the most food, who gets to ration the food out. And even then, usually breeding males, which we would refer to as alpha males, would relinquish food to the breeding female, and then the breeding female would then allot the food to the children. Like, the wolves don't fight for dominance because it doesn't really matter. They'll eat anyways. You know, like, if it works, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And wolves understand that, and we don't, apparently. And this is not only in wolves. I'm only gonna mention this, like, a little bit, but the idea of a pecking order is actually also questioned in a lot of different species of animals. Because again, we are imposing our human gender roles and gender ideals to animals, and they don't care. All they care about is food and not die. Not only this, if there are pups that are still in the den, there are too young to actually come out, the breeding female will actually take the dominant role, it seems, and the male breeder would actually show subordination behavior. In Twilight, the pack structure is so strict that it's like special powers that alphas, when they become alphas, they have the alpha voice, which is so powerful that you can't defy it. And a beta also have the beta voice, which can command everyone in the pack except for the alpha. Which Jacob described the feeling of getting this order as being a puppet on strings, which is again not how wolves work, because they don't like command the other wolves. They're just like, here's some food. Cool. Weirdly enough, the Cullens actually mimic wolf structures in the wild a lot better than the werewolves, because wolves are always in male-female pairs, and sometimes they will adopt. What I do with this information, it's just in my brain now. My rabbit hole in researching this video was not paved with good intentions. It was paved with a lot of coffee, Z library, and like a migraine so strong I can't see for a while, you know. Also, during my research for this, I got my A-level results, so I just had panic attacks that day. So, you know, fun times. This is all to say that I ended up reading a bunch of papers and books that are super weird that I can't find a place to talk about, but now I need to share it because it is rotting my fucking brain, and I need you all to have the brain rot with me. So, I read a book called Wolves and the Wolf Myth in American Literature by S.K. Rubbish. There's apparently a lot of sexual implications with wolves. I thought this was just vampires, but apparently there's a bunch of them with wolves. Again, like, I know that ABO fanfiction exists. I know what DeviantArt is, okay? I know. But I wasn't expecting it to not stay in the sweaty, unwashed crevices of the internet and actually make it into a book, because I will read you the excerpt that is rotting my fucking brain. What we see here is a benevolent ghost wolf, the connection to the gothic romance and revision of it towards the popular and post-goth subculture. The resolution in the modern, especially gendered feminine mind of the Red Riding Hood erotic version. The puzzle over wildness and the standard dark secret in romance plotlines. In trying to reconcile the old world werewolf and the new world obsession with newness, the plots of the paranormal romance revert to certain necessary mythic tropes. One is the ancient, the prospect of the supernatural simply being an older natural, a fantastic world that existed before rather than away from this one. Another is the period romance, usually the medieval romance of Britain or France, and the Renaissance romance of Italy, France, or Spain. I am getting a fucking migraine. So this book is specifically about wolf myths. However, it is interesting that they mention the ancient and the medieval or Renaissance era connection because, I just think it's interesting. They also mention Italy, like, by name. I read a bunch of David Almec papers, and they're all cool. They're all about wolves. However, here's a list of weird shit I found. Also some cute shit, but at the end. Number 1. Wolves lick other wolves to show submission. And then I commented, it's like kissing if kissing was even more gross. Sure. Number 2. Wolves regurgitate their food to feed it to other wolves in their pack. Like a mama bird. But like even more gross because you can see it because they're big animals. And not only to their young, like to each other. Like to their pair. Again, seemingly ABO fanfiction is actually quite apt for this animal. Also, they are doing or they've done artificial insemination to make wolf and coyote hybrids, and the way they put it in the paper is like this, which make me think about fanfiction again. Number 4, if you go to this site, you can see the good boys and girls in the International Wolf Center in Minnesota. Some are the current members of the pack, some are old members that have passed. They're so cute. This was eye bleach for me after reading everything that I've read. They have a wolf cam. They have a live stream of the wolves. And you can see them right now. They're playing in snow. It's really cute. However, this is the weirdest thing. Surprise. It's Marxism. While I was trying to fill this video with as much controversial shit as possible, I guess, I was researching the class implication of vampire-werewolf rivalry. And there are some, but I couldn't find like super good, super clear sources to it. And then I found this paper by George E. Panichas. And the title of the paper is Vampires, Werewolves, and Economic Exploitation. Now, I thought when I saw the title, this was going to be like vampires are strongly associated with aristocracy and nobility and like Vlad the Impaler and Elizabeth Bathory and like royals and nobles who were just fucked. And this was explored by Werner Herzog. Like this is a well-known thing. And I was looking for like, there must be like implications of class in werewolf folklore as well. And then, it wasn't that. It was an economics paper. And then apparently, in Das Kapital, Marx just like talks about vampires and werewolves a little bit. And I'll read it. I also didn't read the rest of the paper because I didn't care. I didn't want to read a paper about like Marxist economics. I want to read about werewolves. Here are the quotes that made me rage quit Notion. Capital is dead labor, that vampire-like only lives by sucking living labor, and lives the more labor it sucks. And the one about werewolves, but in its blind, unrestrainable passion, its werewolf hunger for surplus labor. Capital oversteps not only the moral, but even the merely physical maximum bounds of the working day. What does that mean? What does that have anything to do with werewolves? And like, I get the implications of class with like vampires, because the idea of sucking the life out of something, sure, I guess you can talk about that and capitalism in the same sentence, but werewolf hunger for surplus labor might be my favorite sentence I've read throughout this whole thing. It's my favorite sentence in this pile of 17 pages of paper. That's all I have for you. Go away.